much to this. And even if you're not a pastor, if you're just in ministry, the book that we're going to talk about is Leading and Loving It. Encouragement for pastors' wives and women in leadership. And it's actually written by Lori Wilhite and Brandy Wilson. They are both pastors' wives, and we've actually got Lori with us today to talk about this book and also something that she says, the pastor's wife is dead. We'll have to get to that a little bit here, Ray. But Lori, welcome to today's Issues.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
We are so honored to have you here.
Well, thank you. It's great to be with you guys.
Lori, let's just jump right in and talk about your book, Leading and Loving It, Encouragement for Pastors' Wives and Women in Leadership. There's a lot of misunderstanding, I think, from people in the pew, so to speak, about what it means, the difficulties and challenges of being the wife of the pastor in a local church. Tell us some of the challenges that pastors' wives face that the rest of the world doesn't really understand.
Well, I think in a lot of ways we face a lot of the same challenges that every woman faces. We face, trying to raise our family and trying to balance it all and trying to do that while we're also battling some loneliness and isolation and criticism and all of those things. We just battle all those same things under what people call like the microscope or the spotlight or the fishbowl or however you want to frame it up. And so it just brings an extra level of challenge there when we have so many eyes watching and, so much talk going on about us and our families. And so it's definitely unique in that.
Lori, you interviewed, I think, several pastors' wives for this book, and I think you weave some of their stories in the book as well. What common thread were you finding with all of these pastors' wives that you and Brandy spoke to?
We've been doing work with pastors' wives for about 5 years now, and we've talked to thousands of pastors' wives, and it always seems like no matter what conference we're at, no matter what blog posts we're doing, no matter who we're talking to, the same questions always emerged. And so we kind of identified about 10 pretty universal challenges. I don't care how big your church is or what denomination it is or what kind of ministry you're doing. We all had about 10 different things in common. In fact, my friend just got back from working with pastors' wives in Africa, and she said, you're not going to believe it, but they had the same 10 things. And I said, well, then, I think those are just leadership challenges that we all face. And, one of the main ones is expectations from our congregations. Those used to be expectations that the pastor's wife would play the piano or lead the children's choir or whatever that used to be. And now it's transformed a little bit in a lot of churches. That is the be at everything, lead every Bible study, run a lot of the ministry. And, it doesn't take into account the unique way God has created each of us. Some of us love to do those things, and others of us do not. God has gifted us in different ways, and so figuring out how to balance the expectations of other people and even sometimes the expectations that we have of ourselves, and really putting that in light of what God says about us and who He created us to be and the unique gifts and talents that He's given us and the way He wants us to use those gifts in the unique ministry that He's called us to. So it's finding a balance in all of that.
We're talking with Lori Wilhite. She's the co-author, along with Brandy Wilson, of Leading and Loving It, Encouragement for Pastors' Wives and Women in Leadership, brand new book just out from Faith Words. So, Lori, what does a pastor's wife do if she finds herself in a situation where the expectations of the local church are unreasonable? I suppose, let me put it to you this way, Lori. Suppose we have a new pastor on the scene, and the former pastor's wife, she always took care of the nursery. She was always in the choir, or she always led the Bible studies. Now, a new pastor and his wife are on the scene, and she does not feel gifted in those areas. What does she do?
Well, I think she has to get a little bit of bravery and speak up for herself. And honestly, my husband has been amazing in this, and a lot of pastors are wonderful about speaking up for their wives and telling their congregations that we're going to give the pastor's wife the same kind of grace and encouragement to do what God has called her to do as we do every member of our church. We want every member of our church to use the gifts God has given them, and we want to extend that kind of grace and opportunity to our pastors' wives as well. But so much of the time, just speaking up and laying that out before people, I find people to be pretty understanding once they hear that, because they would want the same thing for themselves. But until they're kind of, those thoughts are put in their minds, it's kind of hard for them to get out of the expectations that they kind of have preset. So speaking up for yourself and letting your husband do that alongside you is incredibly helpful.
You know, Lori, when we think about all these things that we're talking about with the pastor's wife and people in ministry, sometimes people get the impression, hey, you got it all together. You know, you never struggle. And you all address that because you say the typical pastor's wife or woman in ministry is dead. Tell us what you're talking about there.
Well, really what we're talking about is, I think pastors' wives, for the most part, I usually don't need anybody in our church to tell me how I'm not meeting an expectation or how I'm, not fulfilling whatever role they have in their head, because I'm pretty hard on myself, and most of us are. We're pretty aware of our weaknesses and failings and shortcomings, and I spent years feeling like I'm not measuring up to whatever I thought a pastor's wife should be. I had a vision in my head, too, of what I thought a pastor's wife should be, and I knew I wasn't meeting it. And I didn't really need anybody to tell me that. I was pretty clear on that. I knew I wasn't perfect. I knew my house was a mess most days. I knew I'm a terrible cook. All of the kind of things that I thought a pastor's wife should do, I knew I wasn't fulfilling those things, and I was just terrified that I was going to hurt my husband's ministry, impact it in a negative way. And it really led in my life to some years where I really battled with depression and trying to figure out who God created me to be and what that was. So when we say the typical pastor's wife, is that really what we're saying is that perfect woman that we had in our heads. I don't even know that she existed ever, but that perfect woman that we all compared ourselves to and we were all falling short, she's just a myth. But what really a typical pastor's wife is, I think, is just a woman who loves God. She's trying to follow him in the call that he has on her life. She's trying to raise her kids to know and love Jesus, to serve him. She's trying to minister to the people in our church, and she does all of those things imperfectly with a lot of weaknesses and a lot of gaps, but we're trying to figure it out and grow in our faith as well. And that, to me, is a typical pastor's wife now. And if we can all embrace that and quit trying to live up to that imaginary woman, then I think it's so much healthier for all of us, and it puts us on the right path to being able to serve God in the best way possible in the ministries he's called us to.
You know, Laura, you say that you and Brandy in the book talk about the fact that loneliness is a big issue for many women who are in this role of the pastor's wife. And I suppose some church people go, how can you be lonely? You're surrounded by church people all the time. Tell us about the unusual loneliness that a pastor's wife can feel and what maybe can be done about it.
Well, we always say a pastor's wife is loved by many but known by few. And I have sat in the middle of our auditorium surrounded by wonderful people who I knew loved me and felt completely alone. And we are here to minister to people and love on people and pray for people and listen to people and counsel people, and we love doing that and are happy to do it. But we rarely have somebody that can do that for us and kind of minister to us in that way. And very few people that we can talk to about the challenges of ministry. And most of that is because we love them enough to want to protect their worship experience and let church be a wonderful family, great place that the hard things of ministry don't intersect with their lives. And so it's difficult when you have so few people to talk to. And it is the number one thing pastors' wives bring to us every single time we talk to them is the who do you talk to, who can you be friends with, how do you find friends. And it varies for different people, but for me personally, and this is what we really concentrate on in our ministry that we have with pastors' wives, we believe that one of the best things we can do for each other is to develop communities of other pastors' wives. So my very best friends are other senior pastors' wives who live very far from me. I live in Vegas. They live in Nashville and Miami and Oklahoma, and we use up all of our minutes talking on the phone and video chatting and all of those things. But they walk in the same shoes I do, and they understand my life. And when I have a struggle that I can't figure out a way around, or I need some advice, or I need somebody to pray for me, they know how to do that in a way nobody else really can, because they've had those same experiences. And if they haven't last week, they probably will next week. And so we get to journey that together. And so we spend a lot of time, energy, and effort around leading and loving it to help pastors' wives and women in ministry connect with each other and develop community there so that they don't have to be in isolation. God didn't create us for isolation. God created us for community. And just because we're in ministry doesn't mean we're exempt for that. It may mean we have to work a little harder to get it. And so you have to put a little bit more energy and effort into it, but we certainly try to help people do that.
Lori Wilhite, our guest, and along with Lori, Brandy Wilson, they wrote this book called Leading and Loving It, Encouragement for Pastors' Wives and Women in Leadership. You go to their website, find out more about this book, their ministry, leadingandlovingit.com. It's leadingandlovingit.com. That's where you can find out information about this book and their ministry, maybe have them come and connect with you as a pastor's wife. There's a lot of ways they do that. So leadingandlovingit.com is where you can do that. Lori, thank you so very much for hanging out with us today on Today's Issues. Thank you so very much for your ministry and what you guys are doing.
Thank you so much. Have a great rest of the week.
All right. You're listening to Today's Issues, and we will be back. Ray Pritchett and I are going to wrestle a little bit. Well, not quite, but we've got a former professional wrestler who's going to be our special guest with his story coming up.